to start talking about, as we put this, holding our local officials, our police department, everyone in the city accountable to make sure that we don't wind up like a Ferguson or a Staten Island, so that we don't have the kind of outcomes when we have cases like Oscar Grant or Michael Brown or Eric Garner or all of the others who have been killed in police-citizen contact. So we've got, as I indicated, this panel discussion going on that we're going to have. And speaking tonight are going to be Petra DeJesus, San Francisco Police Commissioner, Atisha Brown from #BlackLivesMatter, who's an activist here in the area. Can pick a seat. And Stevon Cook, who's also a community activist here in the Bay Area. Ross Mercury will be here. He was at another event, and he's supposed to be hightailing it over here before we finish. But, however, since we said we were going to start it, we are going to start it. Welcome to all of you. And as I indicated, we're all here because of what happened with Oscar Grant, with Trayvon Martin, with Eric Gardner, and I know, Petra, that you can't speak about it, with Alex Nieto. So all these events are happening in our country. I was having a discussion with some other members of our group, and we were talking about this, and they were saying, you know, Ferguson may have been the tipping point, but Ferguson was the point at which the rest of the country finally realized what was really going on, that all these killings were occurring, but never before had we connected all the dots. They were all individual things, that something happened East Coast, West Coast, South, you know, up in the upper northwest part of the country. But you never got the sense of how many it was until people started putting the information up on the internet. Thank God for the internet. Because you wouldn't know it if you watch TV, you'd have no idea that this was going on. Also, as I explained to my other compatriots, and one of whom said, I can't believe it, this was the big tipping point. I said, you may not have known this was going on. In the black community, we knew that this was going on. But again, getting the message out there, getting people to understand, you know, what was going on, and really take on the issue and say that no, we're all citizens of this country. We're all human beings, first of all. We're all citizens of this country, and we deserve the same rights. And one of those rights is to be safe in our own person, and to not feel that if we're out on the street that something bad can happen to us with no repercussions or no justice for any of it. So, what we're going to speak about tonight is what we do here in San Francisco. You know, as far as making sure that the people directly affected by these sorts of encounters, as well as the greater citizen body or the greater public in the area, do we have procedures and policies? Do we have actions that we can take? Do we feel safe in doing something should this sort of incident happen here? Do we have something in place that's going to get it going? Now, one of the ways I wanted to start this, and I'd spoken to Petra ahead of time, one of the big issues were in both the case in Ferguson and the case in Staten Island, grand juries were convened. And most people, because we don't do grand juries here most of the time, not on police cases or any other cases for that matter, the DA charges if he chooses to do so. But in both those cases, the grand juries came back with no indictments. In the case of Eric Gardner, where there was video. In the case of Michael Brown, where there were witnesses. So could you explain to us, so we're all on the same page about exactly what a grand jury does? Could you explain how it works?
So the grand jury is really, really an ancient thing. It goes back to the Magna Carta. And it was something that was brought over actually to the American revolutionaries. They kept it going, and it was like basically a trial of your peers. And so a magistrate would travel around, and they'd have these grand juries, and then they would decide who was violating the rules of the community, or who made a crime or something. So it's pretty ancient. It's evolved now. It's in statute. Some states have done away with it. California does have a grand jury process. There's a difference between a civil grand jury and a criminal grand jury. And the civil grand jury actually is by statute. They put it together. It lasts for 2 or 3 years. You're sworn in, and you investigate the police department. You investigate government practices, sort of like an audit and things like that. And then they put a report together. And I think some of you have seen that in the news. Every couple of years, the grand jury has investigated this agency. Then they have the criminal grand jury. The criminal grand jury is pretty antiquated, and it certainly was never intended to be used the way these district attorneys are using it today. And the district attorneys are elected officials, and they make the decision based on the evidence that they have to charge or not charge. And this idea of kicking it to a grand jury or convening a grand jury and taking it and saying let the grand jury decide, it tries to make it sound fair, but it's a one-sided process. The only person speaking to the grand jury is the district attorney or his representative. The only evidence going in front of the grand jury is what's cherry-picked or chosen by the district attorney. And even if he gives all the evidence, it's also the way it's presented. And the twists that are put on there is also the slant that's put on there is by the district attorney. It's not a transparent process. No one knows what the questions were. Nobody knows what the videos were. It's a secret proceeding. It can't be disclosed, and then it comes out. The way it's been coming out is there's no charging document, and so for minority communities, that's exactly what they expected going in. I think this is the first time that other people have realized maybe the grand jury doesn't work the way it should be, but it was never intended to be used the way it's being used today. So really, the question comes down to eliminate the grand jury, or keep it, but have it restricted in that for officer-involved shootings, that not be allowed to go to the grand jury, that be excluded from grand jury process, and then the district attorney decide whether he's going to press charges like he did at Oscar Grant, and then you have a preliminary hearing, and all the evidence comes forward. You have, the prosecuting attorney, the defense attorney, and everybody testifies, and people can go and they can watch and they can see. It's reported on TV and you can hear it. You may not agree with the decision, but at least you're able to see it. So there's a transparency issue, which you don't have in a grand jury process. And that's like the 5-minute version. It's much more, complicated, but that's the 5-minute version. That's why they always say you can indict anything you want, including a ham sandwich. I mean, because, there is no other side to question the evidence. So if you point the finger and make accusations and give the evidence, the grand jury's going to indict somebody. There's no defense witness there. There's no defense witness or defense attorney or any representation from the other side. So this is a complete flip-flop where the officer got to come in and testify, give his version, and there's nobody there to question him. No cross-examination. So it's interesting. It was never intended to be used in that way.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we started off with a kind of overview of what goes on with the grand jury, and now we're going to go back to script.
Okay.
So Petra, since you've spoken first, could you just give us some idea of what you do with the
Sure.
San Francisco Police Commission?
Sure.
And something about yourself.
Right, so I do a lot. I sit on the police commission. We set public policy. We're a policy for the department. We can't interfere with the department, but we certainly set policy. So we have standing orders, general orders, which, one of them is investigation of officer-involved shootings, First Amendment activities, whatever they're doing out in public. I think one of the things we're really proud of is we set the CIT in place for dealing with mental health. It hasn't really come up to speed. It hasn't really worked the way we want it to work, but there's something we're putting in place. We also have put in place, the little initials are escaping me right now, but we do have in place the early warning system is what we call it. So if we have an officer who's getting in trouble in the field, that it's flagged immediately and it goes to his sergeant, gets some counseling. If it continues to happen, he's written up and things like that. So there's an early warning system, which is helpful. we also sit as discipline on the police department, and our commission has fired many officers, more than any other commission before us. So the buck stops with us. We have hearings, we sit as judicial officers, and then we get together and we decide whether or not an officer's going to stay on the force or not. So that's one of the reasons I can't speak to ongoing investigations, because it may come in front of us for discipline, and I won't know that until these investigations are complete. The OCC is under us, and the police department is under us. It's investigated. Many of these officer-involved shootings, or all of them, are investigated by the police department. They're investigated by the district attorney's office, and many times, and they're also investigated by the OCC, the Office of Citizens Complaint. An Office of Citizens Complaint can charge an officer with misconduct and bring it directly in front of the commission. The department can charge an officer with misconduct and bring it directly in front of the commission, and then we have the final say.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, our next speaker we're going to have is Letitia Brown. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself? You with hashtag Black Lives Matter, correct?
So,
amongst many other things. I read your bio, it's like this long.
so I am a fourth generation Bayview Hunters Point resident, and I organized Millions March San Francisco as well as Millions March Oakland. And that was a day to bring the community together and provide a safe space for them to heal and grieve because of the number of losses that we've experienced, especially over the past summer into the fall, with police-involved shootings. And I also organized a community building symposium at the Southeast City College campus, and that was another event to bring the community together to talk about ways that we can start to come together and organize ourselves without the help of a nonprofit organization or any direct services, but how can youth come together to organize amongst themselves. So it was basically to empower the community. And I'm just here because I'm passionate about saving lives and bringing about peace and change in the Black community. I'm not with Black Lives Matter in particular. I think a lot of people use that hashtag. I think right now this movement is leaderful, so there's lots of leaders around the country and even around the world who are using the hashtag Black Lives Matter because it's something that needs to be stated, because the way that our government currently treats Black people is like they don't recognize our humanity, and so we want the world to know Black lives do matter.
Okay, thank you very much. And Steve, hi, not another, but a community activist. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you were involved with all issues around this?
Yeah. So my name is Stevon Cook. I like to start just by thanking SF for Democracy for their endorsement in my campaign for school board last year. I received the sole endorsement of the organization, and I truly appreciate that vote of confidence. Also wanted to thank Petra for her support. And I met Eticia at a barbecue 2 years ago, and she was on her way to grad school at NYU. And so she's a very accomplished young woman, and so it's an honor to be sitting next to her. I'm a third generation San Franciscan. I was raised with my grandparents in the city, and I've devoted much of my career to working with young people and trying to, through education, reduce the achievement gap and income inequalities and provide more opportunities for our young people. The reason how I got initially introduced to the movement was through Alicia Garza, who actually coined the phrase Black Lives Matter. Early in my campaign, she endorsed me, and she actually really helped get me in conversation with a lot of other progressive leaders in the city. She was the mastermind behind Free Meaning for You. She's an incredible organizer, and I think what we've seen, along with other folks who have taken up the charge, is a testament to her organizing genius. So since all the incidents have occurred, being that I'm a person of the city and I have a very close connection to a lot of our low-income communities, I was just actually tapped by a lot of white communities for me to explain to them kind of what was happening around this entire movement. So sometimes that happens when things come up that are race-related. Folks that are white that want to understand more may tap like the black person that they know to help explain what's going on. And I think that's important because people have to have a way to get informed. So a lot of what I've been doing is explaining the historic context of racial disparity and how it still comes up today in our systemic racist issues, right? So that's really my involvement with the entire movement, and I've been in a position just to help inform and to help lead conversations to create awareness. I haven't been on the ground organizing like Aticia organized marches from across the country through Facebook, right? So she's definitely well versed in all the organizing that's been happening, but I've just been an ally to the movement and really supportive wherever I can be.
Thank you very much. I have a question to start off this conversation that we're having here regarding this issue. And anyone in the panel can answer this, and especially I'd like both of you, Letitia and Stevon, to definitely answer Petra, since you're working with the police department. But do you all believe that we have procedures and practices here in San Francisco that ensure justice? Because sometimes we say, yes, we have a procedure, but the people that are affected by it don't see it as being very helpful to them. Whereas somebody who's written it thinks that it's the best thing since sliced bread. So we'll start off with Stevon, since I hit Petra first. Do you feel that the procedures and practices we have here in San Francisco ensure justice in your estimation?
Yeah, well, we have a disproportionate amount of African American people and Latino people in our prison system. The systemic issues that we see around over-policing in low-income communities, high concentrations of poverty, where black people are also highly congregated. Those issues are playing out here, like the way that they are across the country. So those arrests, I think, tell the story around how the community is engaging with our police department. What we need, if we're talking about solutions, is a real way to break down some of these trust barriers that we have in our community. I sit on a board called San Francisco Achievers, which gives scholarships to African American males that graduate from San Francisco public schools. And as an exercise, I brought in a police officer who wasn't in uniform to speak to the students, who were high school students at the time, about his job, and they can tell him about his experience. As soon as they found out he was a cop, they completely shut down, and they didn't want to exchange with him in any way. And so, I think what we need more of is some real policy around engagement in the community that's ongoing and consistent, where people get to know one another. We don't have that, so the mistrust continues. That's the short answer.
That's a short answer. Atisha, do you have any ideas?
So I think I agree with Stevon as far as the lack of trust in black and brown communities of police officers, and I think that a lot of that stems from there not being community policing taking place. And I always say that police should be looked at the way that the community sees firefighters, where firefighters, they come into a community and sometimes they're at festivals or fairs and they allow children to interact with their fire truck. That's ideally how we would like police to interact with the community. They should have more events for the community and be a presence there as support and safety, and not like zookeepers. And I think that's where that fear comes from, because there's always a sense that police are looking for trouble or looking to arrest someone, and so that creates this barrier between the community and the police officers. And I think that there also needs to be some accountability within the police department for enforcing general orders and enforcing things like community policing and transparency within the department. And I think that it would be helpful to have a public seat on the police commission to allow the community to participate in cases where police officers are murdering people from the community. There should be a person there that is from the community to aid in that investigation.
So if I may, actually, the police commission, we're not police officers, we don't belong to the police department. I'm a native San Franciscan, I'm an attorney by trade, I grew up in the Mission District, I went to San Francisco State. I am a community person, and I was appointed by the Board of Supervisors to represent the police commission and to do what needs to be done. So those are public spaces. You can run for it. You can take out an application when the position comes up and go in front of the board and get appointed to the police commission. Those are 3 spots. The mayor appoints the other 4. But we're all from different walks of life and different members of the community. I just want to point that out. But one of the things that I would do is information is power, and we know that. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to be gathering information, and there's a lot of laws in place to prevent that information from being allowed into the public. In terms of where the shootings are occurring, who's doing the shootings, all this, who was brought up on charges, how were the charges resolved. There's laws blocking that information, and I think we need to look at those laws and revise those laws so we can get that data, because I think that data is really important. I know cameras are important. I know in New York they failed, it didn't seem to work, but on the other hand, cameras are very important, and the department is looking into it. Obama's given a grant, they're very expensive right now, but I think it's something that's coming and it needs to come. And there needs to be what she talked about is accountability, that camera is on, it stays on, it can't be tampered with, the information goes into the cloud and is protected, so it can't be altered in any way. And then the question is, how do we access that data? Who gets the information, and can anyone review it, or is it just going to be held within the department? So those are policy issues that if we get those cameras, that we need to maybe put a committee together and a group together to decide what that policy will be, and get access to that information and give it to the experts in the field. What are the best practices and what do they see? So I think information is power. I think the cameras are important. I agree with community policing needs to be strengthened. I mean, in San Francisco, we're not Ferguson. San Francisco's done a good job. Doesn't mean we can't do better. We do have groups, and we go into the high schools. We do have basketball. We have PALs. We have interns. But we need to do better, and I agree with that. It would be good if the police could be seen like the fire department. The community policing, we do have cultural training with our officers. We do have community policing, but it's only as powerful as its leader. And I think Greg Sir's done a good job, but I think it's important to continue to go down that path. In San Francisco, 50% of our officers live in San Francisco, so they don't come from the outside. But they actually live here, and I think that's real important for people to live in the community they police. I think that's also a point that you mentioned that's very important. Greg Sir has introduced the stand-down policy for mental health. Part of our problems, part of the police department's officer-involved shootings has really focused, has hit hard in the mental health community. And so this new thing that he's put forward is if there's no one, if you're not, the officer's not, life is not threatened, or a third party is not threatened, to stand down and try to get somebody from CIT there, and deal with the mental health issue rather than escalating and getting out of hand. We talked about the grand jury already. I just think information is really the key.
Okay. And I think you're absolutely right, which is why we're all here this evening, to get additional information about what's going on. I can take one question.
I'm wondering if the police commission is the body that would insist that policemen who work in the city live in the city. I'm glad to hear that at least 50% do.
Right.
But as a former teacher, I mean, it's a real problem when we're serving a community and we're not a member of it.
We did have that rule in place, and it was in place for judges and police officers who had to live in the city to be that. Quentin Kopp lived in the city and wanted to be appointed. He took it up and he got it reversed, and we can't have residential requirements like that. But we do try to give, there was a program I think the voters passed to give teachers and police officers, first responders, access to money so that they can live in the city. So there are some programs that we're trying to increase them living in the city. And it's real important if we have an earthquake or something to have our officers close nearby, so we're very cognizant of that. So, I don't know if that answered your question.
I think also it's important not just to have officers living in San Francisco, which is quite the luxury, and giving them more money isn't necessarily always a solution, but also to have a diversity of officers, so people of color doing the policing within these communities where there is high incidences of police interaction with community members. I know, like, for the meter maids in San Francisco, at least in the Bayview, Hunters Point, where I live, the meter maids are usually from Hunters Point. They're usually black people from Hunters Point. The minibus drivers are usually black people from Hunters Point, people who drive the 44 and the 23. And I think that those two departments do that so that the community knows who's driving their bus, the people know who's giving them their tickets, and there's this relationship with those people. And I think that it's not enough just to have officers who live in San Francisco. There should be officers of color, officers who live in those neighborhoods and who have relationships. And if you don't have officers who are applying to be police officers, then I feel like it's the job of the police department to go out and recruit people of color to be a part of the police academy.
I mean, I agree, that's a really good point. I just want to say that's a really good point. San Francisco has close to 50% women, and we do have probably the highest diversity, but it could be better. I agree. That's an important point.
I wanted to add something too, but
Sure.
do you want to
Well,
ask
I
a
just,
question?
responding to what Letitia was talking about, specifically for Bayview Hunters Point, I don't know how do everyday citizens, black or not black, you gave the sense that there's distrust of the police. And part of the reason there's distrust of the police is because they don't live in the neighborhood. So are the people who live in Bayview Hunters Point aware of the police commission, aware of the mechanisms, and are there a lot of bad things happening despite all the procedures that shouldn't be happening? I don't even know what are the real police shootings, are there real police shootings happening frequently in Bayview Hunters Point? Could you comment on that?
I would say that there is a heavier presence of police officers in the Bayview because of the fact that there are more people of color and it's seen as a bad neighborhood. And when it has that stigma, then I feel like it becomes more socially acceptable for there to be so many police in one area. And I think that as far as police involved incidences, I know, like, Kenneth Harding, he was murdered in 2011 by SFPD on 3rd Street in the Bayview. He was shot multiple times, and the video is on YouTube. You can see it. And he was a 19-year-old, and that happened in the Bayview. And so the sense that, this happens across the country, that you can shoot somebody and be the judge, the jury, and the executioner,